Hey team, Yasin here, and in this training, we're going to be going over problem number 5 of society's current paradigm, and that is going to be about declaring ourselves broken. And so just like all of the other trainings inside of this module, what we are doing is we are continuing our theme of the psychology of transformation, and this is the last and final problem inside of our series of identifying the big 5 problems of society's current paradigm. Right now, at this point, it really does go without saying, I've literally said it in every single one of these trainings, is that training your brain for success is going to serve you for the rest of your life more than any money-making now tactic that you could ever learn. And so I've said this in every single one of the trainings. It's so absolutely critical to make sure that you are understanding what it is that we are talking about inside of this module. And it's really going to start to come together, especially after we finish going through these big five problems. And then we start putting into the practice inside of this module, it's going to absolutely make sense to you. Okay, so just goes without saying, stick with me. This is not going to be as long of a training as the other ones, but it is going to be absolutely critical to go through. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about what society says about declaring its followers broken. What does society say about failed change? Okay, now this might actually sound familiar to you. One day you wake up and you say, you know what? It's time for a life change, right? I'm finally going to do it. I'm going to start going to the gym and working out. I'm going to take a break from social media. I'm going to eat healthier, or maybe I want to have a better relationship with my spouse, start reading a book, stop drinking alcohol, or any other goal that so many people say that they want to have. But then after a few days, after a few weeks, right, inevitably, what ends up happening is that you go back to what you normally used to do, right? And so society then starts to tell you, man, what is wrong with you? Right? Why can't you get your act together? Right? And so then New Year's comes around, and so many in society, they say, okay, I'm going to try again, right? New month, new me, right? It's a new chapter this time. And so this time I'm going to go ahead and pay money for a solution, right? Maybe just because I care about the money, it's going to allow me to be able to feel the pain of that spend going out of my bank account. And that's what's going to motivate me to actually change, right? And then it does work for a short period of time, but then inevitably, just like every other time that we tried to go ahead and change, we end up sliding back into our old unwanted behaviors, right? That went ahead and had us looking for answers in the first place. And then society says, man, you literally hired someone and you still couldn't change, right? Like, what is wrong with you? And then we start to think, man, maybe it was the program, right? Maybe I got to try a different program. Maybe it was fill in the blank, right? It's going to be different this time around. And so program after program, coach after coach, solution after solution, we end up empty-handed. And then what ends up happening is we start to tell ourselves, yep, as usual, I haven't stuck to anything, right? I said that I was going to stick to it. Here I am repeating myself over again, not actually doing anything about it. And then after all, how many times are we going to actually tell ourselves that this is going to be the time. This is going to be the time that I'm going to actually change. And then it eventually starts to become a joke because we're just try again, right? And then it even becomes even more difficult because when we actually join a program to get help from someone else, right? It's enough trying to be disappointed alone, but then it's even harder to have somebody else witness our failure, having somebody else that we respect, like a coach or an authority figure, right? And so having them witness our failure, that's even more difficult than having to fail on our own. And so without even knowing, what ends up happening to us so many times as we follow society's paradigm, right, is consciously or unconsciously, the pain of having someone else witness our failure is so much for us that we start to withdraw. We start to create a distance. We start to be able to eventually ghost or even just quit the program completely. We quit the relationship because of the fact that we cannot keep up with the pain of having to fail over and over and over again, right? And so not because of something was wrong with the program or the coach. You're right. The coach, we might have liked the coach. We might have liked the program. It wasn't so much what was wrong with the program or the coach, but it was more so about what we felt about ourselves. That's why we ghosted, and that's why we quit the program. And this is especially common when we are not actually talking about, right? We talked about the lie of identity. We talked about the misguided focus of transformation. We talked about the false beliefs, right? We talked about so many of the other pieces of this. The false beliefs of money is what we talked about. We talked about being a prisoner to your thoughts and emotions. And so many times, because nobody else talks about how the psychology of transformation actually works, because nobody actually talked to us about you have to become the person who does the action steps, right? All the things that we've talked talked about inside of this module, because nobody talks to us about it, this becomes the cycle that we repeat over and over and over again, right? This is really what ends up happening to us. We are saying, hey, what's wrong with me? Why can't I change? Why am I so broken? Why am I so terrible? When in reality, all of the things that we've talked about inside of this module, those were the real things behind the scenes, right? And so then out of years of frustration, there are so many people who end up turning to medication or turning to insane solutions because of the fact that nothing has worked for them for so many years, and they all of a sudden declare that I am broken, right? And so if you just think about those individuals, maybe you know somebody in your life, maybe you yourself has gone through this, right? There are people out there who have done gastric bypass surgery, which is literally removing parts of our stomach because we are too broken and have tried too many things that all of a sudden we have to try something that is that extreme, and then that sounds like it's reasonable for us because of how broken we feel, right? So all of a sudden these things that are so extreme of literally having a part of our stomach removed seems reasonable because what else is there that we could have done, right? And so then society starts to tell us that we are broken, and we start to believe it, and we start to declare ourselves broken, right? Society tells us that when we try something over and over and over again, and we fail over and over and over again, that something is wrong with us, something that is completely wrong with us, and that we are broken. And so then we begin to tell ourselves, I tried that program. It didn't work, right? I just can't be successful no matter what, right? But what if there was a different way? What if there was a different perspective on how we could look at failure? Because a lot of you, as you are going through this module, are going to start to open your eyes to the way that the real transformation occurs, right? We talked so many things about the identity, and especially as you start to go into some of the practical trainings that are upcoming towards the end of this module, when your eyes start to open about the real truth behind how the psychology of transformation works, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to recode, you're going to have to relearn, you're going to have to retell yourself the story of why you failed so many times in the past. And this training is going to give you that story and that narrative to understand why is it that you fail. Because even with the psychology of transformation, even with everything that we've talked about inside of this module, you're still going to fail. And so you don't want to end up repeating this entire cycle and then declaring yourself broken, right? And so let's go ahead and take a look at what the transformation paradigm actually says about failed change, because failed change and failure is going to be a very, very important part of our lives. And we need to make sure that we are reframing it so that way we are not repeating this cycle of declaring ourselves broken, because that's not going to serve anybody, right? And so let's go ahead and talk about what the transformation paradigm actually says about failed change, okay? So number one is that the transformation paradigm tells us that it's true. We haven't been imagining it. Change and transformation is hard. No doubt about it, right? It recognizes that it's normal for change to be difficult, rather than what society's paradigm says is that if we fail to change, then all of a sudden you are to blame, you are to be shamed for, right? The transformation paradigm, on the other hand, says that if you fail and if you make a mistake and if you end up not being able to transform, and if you're not able to make that change, it recognizes that it is difficult. It doesn't mean that you're broken. And so instead of putting on the shame and blame game, right, instead of putting that on ourselves because of our failed attempts, the transformation paradigm urges us to understand why change is difficult. Because when we understand why change is difficult, then we can stop thinking that we are the problem, and we can stop beating ourselves up, right? Instead, when we understand why change is difficult, we can start to see failure inside of change as a part of life and as a part of the process. It's not an actual problem. It's just a byproduct of being human. We can stop labeling it as a problem, right? And so rather than being busy beating ourselves up and having all of this negative self-talk, what we can do instead is we can actually start to work with ourselves rather than spending energy wondering what is wrong with us, right? And so when your eyes really open up to what it is that we're going to be talking about inside of this training, then you can stop declaring yourself broken. Because yes, change is hard, but it is possible, okay? And so to really break this down is I'm going to go ahead and talk to you guys about two specific parts. And these two specific parts are critical to understand why we fail in change as human beings, okay? This is going to be very important. The very first part that we're going to go ahead and talk about is going to be why we sabotage ourselves. And then the second part is going to be about why change is difficult, okay? Those are going to be the two parts of this training. And so unlike having 7-10 different parts, this one's going to be a little bit lighter, but it's going to be absolutely critical, just like all of the other ones. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about why we sabotage ourselves. Okay, what if I told you that every single time you sabotaged yourself, you actually enjoyed it, right? What if you actually enjoyed sabotaging yourself, right? You'd probably say that I was crazy, right? What if your self-sabotage was your brain's way to actually resist change and always stay inside of the comfort zone, right? That'd be pretty crazy. And so the brain sometimes does crazy things to be able to protect us, right? We talked about inside of the previous training, we talked about the limbic subconscious self. And we said that the number one thing that the subconscious limbic mind, and really most of the brain, because most of the brain is made up of the subconscious limbic mind, the biggest thing that it is out to do, it is there to help us survive, not to help us thrive, okay? And so our brains sometimes do crazy things in order to protect us, or what it thinks will protect us, right? And so what I want you to do is I want you to take, for example, something called Stockholm Syndrome, right? Did you know that there are people who have been kidnapped, and after they are found and they are set free, sometimes they actually struggle with feelings of want to return back to their captor, right? They actually miss their kidnapper. Like they actually miss their kidnapper. It's true, right? If you look up what Stockholm Syndrome is a coping mechanism in which the captive starts to have positive feelings for their kidnapper. How crazy is that, right? But how is that even possible? The reason it's possible is because when the person was kidnapped, what ended up happening was that the person had to literally rewire their entire brain. Their brain had to literally change its physiology in order to adjust to the situation, okay? It had to find pleasure in its kidnapped situation in order for it to be bearable. And so then when the kidnapped person was set free, they actually don't feel normal anymore because their brain has created a new normal. And that new normal that was created for themselves via their brain was that kidnapped situation. And so they actually preferred to be kidnapped because their brain had rewired itself, right? How crazy is that? Their brain doesn't feel comfortable being free anymore. And so as a result, they try to return back to their kidnapper because for them, that is more normal than being free. How insane is that, right? And so what I want to do is I want to talk to you about what I kind of codename on here, Stockholm Syndrome in our lives, okay? Because I understand that the typical Stockholm Syndrome might be an extreme example, right? And we feel sympathy for those who go through that situation. However, the same concept actually still holds true for each and every single one of us. Our brains will actually do very crazy things in order to return to what it considers to be a normal baseline, okay? Even if those crazy things means sabotaging ourselves, right? Does it mean that somebody who has been kidnapped is sabotaging themselves when they actually struggle with feelings of want to return to their kidnapper? Of course. They're taking a step back in life if they go and return back to their kidnapper or their abuser or anything like that, right? And so they're taking a step back in life. However, their brain doesn't see it as they're taking a step back in life. Their brain sees it as we're just returning back to normal. Right? And so even if these crazy things mean sabotaging ourselves, that is what our brains will do. That is what our subconscious limbic selves will do, right? Not our conscious minds. We talked about the difference between the conscious self and the limbic self. Our conscious minds are like, no, this doesn't make any sense. This is not logical. However, we still struggle with those feelings and those emotions of sabotaging ourselves because that is the normal baseline, right? This is what scientists call the homeostatic impulse. That's a scientific name for it. And it's also referred to many times as the upper limit problem. Okay. This is how it works. Inside of the upper limit problem, each person has an inner thermostat of success and happiness that was basically programmed into us when we were children based on our conditioning and our programming, okay? So basically this normal baseline of what we consider success, happiness, cleanliness, how much money we can make, all of these expectations and beliefs that we have about ourselves and our normal baselines for these categories of things, all of these things are like an inner thermostat, okay? This is how the upper limit problem works. And so what happens is that when we exceed our setting of positivity, right, in our lives, what we do is we unconsciously sabotage ourselves and we come back to a more familiar and comfortable temperature. We're trying to return back to that normal baseline, even if logically that normal baseline is taking a step back inside of our lives. And you're going to start to notice as you really open your eyes to this upper limit problem, you're going to start to notice this upper limit problem literally everywhere, right? What you're going to notice is that, and this is something that I noticed in myself myself many years ago was that for some reason, right, when I was first getting started inside of this game of entrepreneurship and inside of this game of making money online, what I started to realize was that, okay, I would some months make more than $5,000 a month, but then whenever I got above this threshold, I would actually start to take my foot off the gas and I would start to say, you know what, I don't got to work as hard, right? I'm making $5,000 a month. But then whenever on some months I would get to the point where I was making less than $2,000 a month, right? My cortisol levels would go up, my stress levels would go up, and I would work like hell in order to make sure that I was able to not go below $2,000 a month. And then all of a sudden, right, I would go back up. And then if I made more than $5,000 a month, I would go ahead and take my foot off the pedal. And then I would go back down again, right? And then if I made less than $2,000 a month, I would go ahead and not be able to sleep and make sure that I worked like hell in order to make sure that I could go more than $2,000 a month. And so what it was is that there was this constant up and down, this inner thermostat. And most of the time I was kind of stuck right here, right smack dab in the middle, right? And then I had these two standards, two temperatures at the very top and one at the very bottom. And then this was not only in my income. I started noticing this in every single area of my life. I started noticing that my hygiene standard, like whenever my apartment years ago, if it got more than 80% clean, then I would kind of take my foot off the pedal. I wouldn't like, it's 80%, it's good enough, right? And then if it ever got lower than 20% clean, I would say, this is not good. I gotta go ahead and make sure I clean it because this is just my standard, right? And so I would notice the same thing with my shower whenever I would shower, right? So like I would have an internal thermostat that would say, okay, hey, more than one shower a day, you take your foot off the pedal. But anything less than like a shower every 3 days, I'm like, nah, dude, I don't care what's happening in my world right now. This is my bare minimum standard. I need to make sure that I go ahead and take a shower. And so this is what we call our standards, right? We sometimes call it our hygiene standard in different areas of life, right? And you're going to notice that this happens in your relationships, this happens in your health. Sometimes you're eating very, very healthy for a while, and then you start to take your foot off the pedal. And then once you get to a certain point, you're like, oh man, I've gained X amount of weight. I've hit my limit. And then all of a sudden you work towards getting rid of that, right? And so literally what ends up happening is that you end up inside of this thermostat going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And you can never go more than a certain temperature, and you can never go less than a certain temperature either. And so there's a gentleman by the name of Gay Hendricks, and he talks about this inside of his book called The Big Leap. And he describes the moment where he learned about the upper limit problem. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and recount this story for you because I think it's going to really hit this concept home for you properly. Okay, so basically Gay Hendricks, one day he was at work and he was a professor at Stanford, and things were going well, right? His life was going awesome. He just had gotten a raise and he was loving his life, and he was just gotten back from lunch with his friend. And so one day he came back to his office. Things were going great. And he sat back in his desk, in his chair, and he really just kind of kicked it back, and he was just having a, sigh of relaxation. He felt great. But then a few seconds later, he found himself actually worrying about his daughter, Amanda, who was away at summer camp. And then all of a sudden, a slideshow of painful images started coming on into his head, right? They said, oh man, Amanda, my daughter, she's sitting alone at camp and she's miserable and the other kids are making fun of her. And then all of a sudden, that inner joy that he had, that his life was going good, it started disappearing from his mind and his body as his mind continued to produce these painful images, okay? And then immediately, when he started to feel those painful images, he grabbed the phone and he called the counselor at the camp, the supervisor, where his daughter was staying, and he said, hey, is my daughter okay? What's happening? And then the supervisor told him, hey, your daughter's fine, right? She's out there playing. I can see her right now. She's playing with some friends. And so then he hung up the phone and he started feeling foolish. And he started wondering to himself, like, how in the world did I go from feeling so good in one moment and then all of a sudden manufacturing a bunch of painful images in the next? And then that is when he realized that the painful images that his brain was playing for him, it was because he was feeling good, right? It was as if some part of his brain was afraid of enjoying good, positive energy for any extended period of time. And so what happened was when he reached his upper limit of how much positive feeling that he could handle, right? His mind would start to produce a series of unpleasant thoughts that would start to bring him down, right? And then the thoughts in his mind would guarantee that they would bring him back to a state in which he was more familiar with, which is not feeling so good, okay? And so even though worrying about his child at camp That was just one way that his brain could have manufactured for him to feel bad. His brain literally could have come up with any number of crazy thoughts or of feelings or scenarios that would dampen his mood, right? It wasn't the thoughts about his daughter that was specifically special. They were just the convenient thing that his mind was able to latch onto in order to sabotage his good feelings. And then he started to notice this in every other area of his life as well, right? He would enjoy a period of harmony, things are going awesome with his spouse and his relationship, and then all of a sudden he would sabotage it. He would sabotage that good positivity by criticizing his wife and starting an argument, right? Same thing with his eating habits. He would eat healthy for a little while, have plenty of exercise, things were going great, and then he would hit this upper limit, he'd hit this upper temperature, and then all of a sudden he would go out and binge, and he would just really take it to the next level, right? And so the pattern that he noticed was that he would enjoy a period of feeling really good, and then something else would come in and mess everything up. And if you want to see a real life example of this pattern of existence, of this upper limit in action, then you can literally just take a look at lottery winners, right? One study actually found that 60% of those who were lottery winners actually ended up blowing their money within 2 years and returning back to their thermostat level of comfortability with their finances, right? And so whenever they had all of this money, they would just end up going back to their level of comfort and self-sabotaging, even though they had made all of this money, right? And then what ends up happening is that this ends up going on inside of different areas of our life. It doesn't actually end up having to be in that one area of our life. In some cases, a rock star whose career is blowing up, he might end up developing a drug problem. An entrepreneur who's started after so many years, their business has taken off, they end up losing it all, right? A sports star who's starting to do amazing in his career, he ends up getting a huge injury, right? And so what happens is that sometimes success in one area of our life ends up leading to a lower temperature in other areas of our life, right? We have a big financial win, but we end up fighting with our spouse. We get married, but our business fails. We publish a book, but then we end up breaking our leg. And so it's not necessarily only in that category of life in which we're going to go ahead and decrease our temperature. Sometimes things are going really well in a different area of our life, but then we've hit this upper limit in that area of our life, so we go ahead and sabotage in a different area of our life. This is what is referred to as the upper limit problem, or otherwise known as the homeostatic impulse, right? Is that we have a limited tolerance of our lives going well in general. And then when we hit that certain limit that exists, we end up doing something that stops that positive progress, right? Something that brings us back to this destruction, this cycle, this vicious cycle that keeps bringing us back and back and back to the point that we are comfortable, right? And again, remember, this upper limit is something that is set and programmed and conditioned to us over time and through our childhood and through the different experiences that we've gone through. And so we end up stuck within this frame, within this cycle, within this temperature adjustment, back and forth, and everybody's is different, okay? And so this is how the upper limit problem keeps us trapped, right? By making more money, experiencing more love, or drawing more positive attention to ourselves, we end up tripping the upper limit switch, right? There's a deep voice inside of us that says, nah, you can't possibly feel this good. You can't possibly make this much money, right? You can't possibly be this happy in your love life, right? It's not possible. Something's gonna go wrong. This doesn't work like that, right? And so unconsciously what we do with that voice, once that goes in there, is we start to do something to bring ourselves back down to a thermostat setting that we are more familiar with, just like Stockholm Syndrome, okay? And so the bottom line is that each of us has an inner thermostat setting that determines how much momentum, progress, success, and love that we allow inside of ourselves to enjoy. And then when we exceed that inner thermostat setting, we will often do something to sabotage ourselves and cause ourselves to drop back to the old familiar zone where we are more comfortable, okay? Now that you understand this upper limit problem, now that you understand this phenomenon actually exists, the next question that you might ask is, okay, well, how do I actually overcome this upper limit problem? This is a funny graphic that I went ahead and put together for you guys, right? It's like, okay, hey, we got this upper limit problem that is this obstacle, and then the rest of society doesn't even know that this upper limit problem exists. They don't even know that the homeostatic impulse exists. They're just busy declaring themselves broken. But then once you understand and your eyes are open to the upper limit problem, unlike the rest of society, you're going to be able to leap over this hurdle inside of your life, and then just make sure that you can go ahead and achieve your wildest dreams because you understand how to overcome the upper limit problem, right? And so let's go ahead and talk about exactly how we are going to overcome this upper limit problem, okay? Now, because our upper limit problem has things that are limited, like for money, love, health, and success, this is conditioned into us when we're children. It can be challenging to reprogram this, right? Because it's so deep inside of our subconscious, but it is possible. How? If you remember what it is that we talked about inside of the previous training about consciousness, about choice, our ability to be conscious allows us to be able to choose our reactions, right? And so to overcome the upper limit problem, we actually have to rewire our automatic reactions of feeling too good. We have to reset the thermostat setting in order to be actually change what we do when we feel too good, okay? And so the two-step process that we talked about when we talked about becoming conscious is actually the same two-step process that we need to utilize in order to overcome our upper limit problem. And so step number one of that process, if you remember inside of the consciousness training, was about becoming present and getting into observer mode, right? We must first become present and observe the upper limit problem. Once we hit that upper limit and we start to feel that, okay, you know what, I'm starting to do this thing where I'm self-sabotaging, I'm criticizing, I'm deflecting. There's all these different signs that you can observe when you upper limit, and everybody upper limits in a different way. Once you start to recognize it for what it is, which is our subconscious limbic self is trying to keep me safe by keeping me at a setting that is more normal for it, right? Because this limbic self is really just trying to protect me, and it feels like it is protecting me and keeping me alive by keeping me more in the familiar zone, right? This zone is like, oh, hey, we can't go any more than this because we don't know what happens. We're not used to going more than this. So therefore, we may end up dying if we go more than this. And if we go lower than this, things don't go well. So that's why we got to make sure that we stay above this setting over here, right? And so the brain, the limbic self says, you know what? I got to stay within this zone right here because this is what's familiar to me. This is how I know for a fact I'm going to be able to stay alive. And so once we become present and conscious to it, then what we can do is we can start to get into observer mode like we talked about in the previous training, and we can start to observe the limbic self and the upper limit problem in its entirety, right? We can start to witness our body's sensations when we feel like we're hitting the upper limit problem, and we can start to observe and just witness without judgment. And then step two, once we are in observer mode, right, which is the difficult part, actually flexing our conscious muscles to make sure that we are able to get into observer mode. Then once we get into that mode, we can use our power of choice to instead talk back to those negative thoughts and emotions, and we can choose not to ride the roller coaster of negativity, and we can choose to focus on the positive instead. So as we start to be able to hit that upper limit problem at the top, right, as things start to go really well for us, and then we start to have these negative self-talk, we start to say, hey, I can't feel this good. You start to talk back to yourself consciously now and start saying to yourself, no, it is okay to feel this good, right? It is okay to have positivity, right? You don't have to sabotage yourself, right? And so this is how we can start to increase our upper limit thermostat and overcome the upper limit problem by increasing how much positivity and success that we can handle in our lives. And again, this is individual. That individual thermostat setting, that temperature, is individual for every single one of us, right? For some people, they might not be able to make more than $5,000 a month until they go ahead and start taking their foot off the pedal. Some people might be $10,000 a month. Some people's standards are that, you know what, I at a bare minimum, I have to make, let's say, $100,000 a month, right? And my upper limit is like, $300,000 a month, right? And so it's not that you're ever going to be able to get rid of this thermostat completely, but the goal is to be able to increase this temperature, this acceptability of feeling good over and over and over again. And there are different levels of this. And so you're able to increase this thermostat setting over the course of your life in every area of your life by observing it and then slowly allowing yourself and talking back to yourself to focus on the positivity and say, hey, it's okay. I am allowed to make more than $300,000 a month. Now you're listening to me saying that right now, and you're like, that's insane. But it's true. That is the upper limit of some people, and that is the lower limit of some people. There's no reason why you cannot get there either. It's just going to take time and increasing your thermostat little by little by little by little, and then you're going to get to the point where you've increased it to massive numbers. And even $100,000, $300,000 a month for some people in the world, and in terms of their standards, is actually pretty low as well. And so I really just want to expand your mind and change your beliefs about what is possible for you, because like we talked about in the training about beliefs, once you change your beliefs of what is possible for you, like we talked about in the false belief of money, once you start to reprogram those beliefs of what's possible for you, then that shapes your world. And then when you have your paradigm, that ultimately shapes your reality. And so ultimately, this is how we are able to shatter society's current paradigm, because when society tells us that we are broken, that we cannot change, in truth, it's not that we are broken. It's because there's something much bigger going on inside of our brains. And most of society doesn't even know that this exists, right? Our brains have that homeostatic impulse, has that upper limit problem that is hardwired into us when we are children, right? It takes something like being conscious and deliberate to be able to recognize that in order to rewire it. And so instead of declaring ourselves broken, which is what so many people in society's current paradigm do, what if we just actually understood the upper limit problem and we worked with it rather than spending so much of our lives frustrated with ourselves, right? Instead, what we could do is we could focus on choosing, and we could focus on doing the work to change ourselves rather than passively and unconsciously blaming ourselves that we are broken and spending so much time with that, okay? And so that is the first part of what the transformation paradigm says about understanding why we fail with change, okay? That is the first part. The second part, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and now take a second to understand why change is difficult. Why change is difficult, okay? So that is the next part that we want to talk about, is really understanding at a neuroscience level why change is difficult. And maybe you've wondered, like, hey, why is it so difficult to be able to fight our brain in order to change? Why is it so difficult to be able to win this war and this battle between our subconscious limbic self and our conscious self? Why is it that so many times we end up in autopilot mode where our limbic subconscious self is able to take control of the steering wheel of ourselves, right? And then our conscious self ends up in RIP and we are in 100% limbic survival mode, right? Why is that the case? Why is it that our subconscious self is sometimes so strong? And the reason why that is the case is because our brain is actually made up of something called neurons, okay? And those neurons are made up of something called synapses, okay? Now, I'm going to go ahead and talk to you about this. And like always, stick with me about this. You might be thinking, dang it, Yasin, more of this brain science stuff, like stick with me here. I know I say stick with me here a lot. At this point, I think I should probably just own like a glue company or something because of how much I talk about sticking with me. But I know we talk about brain stuff a lot, but it's literally the topic of this entire module when we talk about the psychology of transformation, right? And so brain science is literally a part of it. So I just want you to stick with me, okay? And we want to talk really quickly about why change is difficult inside of your brain, okay? So you have your brain here, and then your brain is actually made up of a bunch of different neurons, okay? These are neurons, and then that are connected via a bunch of different things called synapses, okay? This is kind of like what it looks like, okay? And so what you need to do is, in order to understand how to transform your life, you need to understand that thoughts actually get hardwired into your brain, kind of like when something is being welded together, okay? This is what I want to go ahead and emphasize to you, because a lot of people think that, hey, you know what? Change is all about just changing my thoughts and changing my emotions and consciously choosing, which is what we've talked about in the previous trainings. But what I want to emphasize here is that your brain at a very physical level, from the synapses and from the neurons, whenever you have thoughts and emotions and habits and actions and behaviors and beliefs, what's happening is that they're actually getting hardwired into your brain. That is kind of like being welded into your brain, okay? And that's what I want to open your eyes up to right now, because when you understand this, you can actually understand how long is it going to take you to change. You can start to be able to predict how difficult the change is going to be. And that's not to discourage us, but it's more so for us to be able to understand it so we can work with the change rather than trying to fight it, okay? So let's go ahead and talk about how this works. Whenever you have a thought or whenever you take an action, okay, what ends up happening is that a synapse in your brain fires and it makes the connection stronger and deeper, okay? So remember we talked about the synapses here, okay? And so imagine you have a thought or an action, and then your brain decides, cool, I'm going to take this synapse, this path right here, okay? And then this path, whenever that fires, it's kind of like an electromagnetic signal, okay? Our brain works off of electricity, these electromagnetic signals, and these electromagnetic signals pass through these synapses, and these synapses is what emanates itself into a thought or an emotion or a habit or a behavior or whatever, okay? And so the more we think certain thoughts or repeat certain actions, those patterns literally become hardwired into our brain at a physical level. And so you can kind of imagine that it's kind of like a grass field, okay? When you haven't actually thought a thought or you haven't taken an action, there is no path to walk through, right? This entire grass field is like wild grass everywhere. There is no path that is easy for the synapse to take in order to walk through, right? But then over time, the more that you think about a certain thought or you do a certain action over and over and over again, what ends up happening is that entire grass field that was there, you end up walking down that synapse over and over and over again. That you can kind of imagine, like, when there's a grass field and people walk over the same place over and over and over again, what happens is that there becomes like a rut in there, right? And that rut is created from walking on the same patch of grass over and over and over again, right? And so the more we practice certain thoughts over and over and over again and repeat certain actions and behaviors over and over and over again, it changes and rewires our brain, and it makes it easier to be able to default to those thoughts and actions in the future, right? And so the reason that we get stuck thinking of a certain thought over and over and over again, the reason we get stuck in repeated behaviors, aka habits, right? Habits of thought, habits of behavior, right? All of that. Why does that happen? It's because the synapse has started to get burnt deeper and deeper and deeper into the grass path. And so in the beginning, right, when we started that action or that thought, there was no path in order to go. It was just all like wild grass. But then that synapse started to get stronger because the electromagnetic signal inside of your brain started to get sent through that same synapse over and over and over and over and over and over again. So therefore it became kind of like a rut. And this path became much easier for our brain to actually walk through, right? And so eventually the brain just starts to take the path of least resistance in order to be able to think a thought or do an action, right? So I want you to ask yourself, which of these two pictures is actually easier to walk through? Like, imagine if you're going on a walk and then you come across a field that looks like this, okay? And then you come across a field that looks like this. Which one is actually easier to walk through? Obviously the one on the right. And so the reason that is the same case in your brain is because that path that has been burnt into your brain via that synapse getting stronger and stronger and stronger, that rut getting deeper and deeper and deeper, that's what your brain actually ends up finding the path of least resistance in order to take over and over and over again. And so the reason that we end up getting stuck in patterns and habits of thought and behaviors is because we fired the same path in our brain so many times that it starts to become this deep rut that becomes easier and easier for our brain to be able to go through when taking this path, right? It starts to become an automatic response as that rut becomes deeper and deeper and deeper inside of our brain at a physical level, right? How crazy is that? And this is why I'm talking to you about this, is because so many people don't even understand this. They don't understand that your brain is literally rewiring itself, reprogramming itself, welding different parts of it together at a physical level, right? Thoughts and emotions are physical electromagnetic signals and hormones and cortisol and dopamine and all these things that are going on inside of your brain. They're physical things that are going on. And that's why sometimes change is more difficult. And so I want to really give you an example to bring this home, right? Is, let's say, for example, you have a thought, and that thought is, you know what, I'm bored. And then the action that you take from that thought is that you go ahead and grab cookies, okay? So you have the thought, and then the action that you take to burn that synapse is that you go ahead and grab cookies, okay? I'm bored, I'm going to go ahead and grab cookies, okay? Now, the very first time that you go ahead and have that thought and link that to that behavior and that action, the very first time you do that, it's kind of like that grass field where the path hasn't been taken before. And so you had the thought, I want cookies. And then, it takes you time. Like, you go back and forth with it. It's not like an automatic behavior. It's not something you've really done before. So it takes like 10 minutes. It takes like 10 minutes, but then eventually you go ahead and grab the cookies, okay? So you go ahead and grab the cookies. And so that's kind of like the field in which there is no path, okay? But then over time, every single time that you feel, I'm bored, every time that you think I'm bored, you go ahead and grab the cookies. Every single time I'm bored, grab the cookies again and again and again. And so every single time you are carving and burning that path and that connection deeper inside of your synapse. And then over time, what ends up happening is that your brain synapse becomes so deep that I am bored becomes an automatic response for your brain to take the path of least resistance in order to grab the cookies. And so what was a field that didn't have a path, a synapse that was burned easily into it, now it becomes an automatic rut that you have the feeling or the craving or the thought that I want cookies. And then it's not 10 minutes now, it's 1 minute later, you all of a sudden are grabbing the cookies because now you have that path and that synapse that has been burnt into your brain at a physical level. And then this is the crazy part about this, is that what happens is that eventually that rut becomes so deep, right? If you do that over and over and over and over again, it becomes such a deep path, a deep rut that is burnt into your brain that trying a new behavior or thinking a new thought actually becomes difficult. Because this rut, you can see this rut looks a lot deeper than the previous ruts that we were talking about, right? This rut is significantly deeper. And so now whenever you feel cravings or whenever you think about cookies or whenever you have this thought, it's now not 10 minutes later, it's not 5 minutes later, it's not 1 minute later, it's 1 second later you're grabbing those cookies, and it's an automatic response that has been programmed into your subconscious mind, because now you have this deep rut that the path of least resistance means that your brain is just automatically going to go ahead and revert back to that automatic response, okay? So that's literally how it works. Now, the crazy thing about this is that this brain synapse rut concept that I just went ahead and talked to you about, it actually works both ways, right? It can serve us as our best friend, or it can destroy us like our worst enemy, right? So when we consciously choose our actions, behaviors, thoughts, beliefs, right, that are in alignment with who we are becoming, okay, then it becomes easier for us to be able to repeat that becoming and that being in the future. However, when we unconsciously choose our actions, when we unconsciously choose our behaviors, thoughts, beliefs, right? And when we choose things that are taking us away from being who we want to become, it actually becomes easier for us to be able to repeat those negative, quote unquote negative, right? Because they're taking us away from who we want to become. It becomes easier to repeat those thoughts, beliefs, actions, and behaviors in the future as well. And so what that means is that everything is habit forming. Whether that be a thought habit, whether that be a belief habit, whether that be an action and behavior habit, everything is habit forming, right? And so this is why we must absolutely be conscious about our choices, and we must be careful about what it is that we are creating habits and synapses in our brains for. Otherwise, we are literally going to have to rewire and reshape the ruts and the paths in our brain, because they're going to make it difficult for us to be able to have the life that is the successful life that we want. Right? And so that's why we have to be so careful about this. And so the bottom line summary of this is those are the two parts that I wanted to really hit home for you when we talk about how the transformation paradigm talks about failed change, right? When you understand and your eyes are open to the upper limit problem and why we sabotage ourselves, and the brain rut synapse concept that explains why change is difficult, now that we understand both parts, we can stop wasting time and declaring ourselves broken, and instead we can start to use that energy that we're wasting on beating ourselves up, and we can actually use it to go ahead and rewire and retrain our brain so that we can work with change. So that way we can actually work with our brains to create the life that we've always wanted, okay? Because at the end of the day, we only have one brain, right? It's the only brain that we're going to be able to use to make our dreams a reality in every area of our life. And so even though change is hard, yes, that's what the transformation paradigm says. Yes, it is hard. Understand that. But it is possible, okay? You don't want to get overwhelmed, okay? Change and the transformation process is exactly that. It's a process, right? It's going to take time. You didn't get to where you are overnight, but at the end of the day, you got this. Like, we're here to help you, okay? And every step of the way, that's why you're inside of this program. And so now that we've really broken this down to a science, what we're going to do is in upcoming trainings, we're going to show you the exact step-by-step process of what we call the becoming process, okay? Because now you understand the foundations. You understand the big 5 problems with society's paradigm, okay? And so on that last note, I want to go ahead and emphasize, let's talk about not beating ourselves up, okay? What I want to go ahead and finalize and close out this training with is I want to talk about stop abusing yourself. This is a big one. I want to talk about stop abusing yourself, okay? Self-abuse is not a funny or lighthearted topic. It is a very serious topic, okay? But most of society talks about self-abuse and beating ourselves up in the physical sense, okay? But inside of the transformation paradigm, we talk about this very serious topic in the psychological sense, okay? Because what's happening is that when we are declaring ourselves broken, and when we believe society's way of thinking that we are broken, what we are doing is we are harming nobody else except ourselves, okay? What we do is we set the expectation that all of a sudden we want to become somebody new and somebody completely different tomorrow, and then we get overwhelmed and we stop. You go through this module and you say, okay, I learned all this awesome stuff. All of a sudden, I'm going to go ahead and transform my entire being tomorrow. But what you do is you have to remember that you are not going to stop being your current version 1.0 self tomorrow. It's going to take time for you to actually become the new version of yourself. That's what we call your version 2.0 self, right? You didn't get to where you are overnight, and you're not going to become your version 2.0 self overnight either, right? But if you stick with it, I promise you, you will be shocked how far you will come in just a matter of a couple of weeks, in a matter of a couple months, in a matter of 1 year. You will be a completely different person, okay? And so it's very important to understand that change and transformation is a process. It's not an overnight snap your fingers event. That's what we talked about inside of this training. It takes time to reprogram your upper limit. It takes time to rewire your brain because it's a physical thing that's going on. It's a physical change with the ruts and the synapses that are going on in your brain, okay? And so what ends up happening is that punishing yourself for making a mistake or a misstep, what it does is it only sets you back further, right? Being a jerk to yourself rarely helps with anything, okay? So what I want you to do is I don't want you to take a minute of self-doubt and turn that into an hour of negative self-talk, okay? Because when you understand that your limbic subconscious self is just trying to protect you, when you understand how your brain works, you can start to work with your subconscious limbic self rather than against it. You can start to talk to it. You can start to nurture it. In some trainings, I sometimes talk about the limbic self being like your inner child, right? It just wants to protect you. It just wants to survive. And so you can start to talk to it. You can start to calm it down. You can start to say, hey, we're not going to ride that roller coaster of thoughts and emotions, right? And so remember, rather than punishing yourself with negative self-talk, understand your inner survival mode, understand your inner limbic child, your inner subconscious child, right? Don't abuse that inner subconscious child. Talk to it. Allow it to understand where you're coming from, right? Learn to love yourself and learn to work with yourself, okay? And so to really close out this training, I really want you to know that change is possible. Change is possible. Some students, after going through this module, like I said, they do get overwhelmed. They start to beat themselves up, right? They say, oh man, I've been living in society's paradigm for so many years. I've messed up. I've let my limbic self ruin my life and run my life. Well, guess what? When you do that, you're actually doing exactly what it is that we learn not to do, right? What we did is we talked about inside of this training not to do negative identity statements. We talked about being able to change your identity. We talked about the power to evolve. We talked about the power of choice, right? You can get better, right? It's not about how you start, it's how you finish. And so unless you're literally trying to pack up and just end up dying tomorrow, I'm telling you right now, as you're listening to me inside of this training, you've got plenty of life left in you. Right? We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And so we plan for the best. Okay. And so you can retrain and reprogram your brain for success. Okay. Remember, your brain is neuroplastic, right? Neuroplasticity is a thing. And so that means that it can change. It just requires work. And you are in this program for that exact reason, to transform your life. Okay. And so it's really time to roll up our sleeves and it's time to get to work. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing and talking about inside of the upcoming next trainings. Now that we've concluded talking about the 5 problems with society's paradigm, it's all about rolling our sleeves up and really starting to get to work, okay? And so this has been this training with problem number 5 of declaring ourselves broken in society's paradigm. In terms of your engagement question for this training, I would love to hear from you in terms of summarizing what you learned, right? What are your thoughts on declaring ourselves broken? Do you think that there is some merit to it? What else can you provide in terms of, remember, we talked about adult learning is all about providing your experiences and contributing and using the things that you've gone through in your life and attaching them to the exercises and to the training that we're going over. And so the more you start to attach your existing experiences, it's not childhood learning. Children don't have many experiences that they can connect to what it is that you're learning. So what you got to do is you got to connect what it is that you are learning inside of this training to other experiences that you've had, and let those insights and those aha moments really start to fire in your brain. And that's what's going to allow you to have that change, okay? Where do you see yourself applying what it is that you have learned inside of this training? And what aha moments did you really have from this training? And just as always, I want to go ahead and remind you, this is your opportunity to engage. We and the other students love to hear from you, and we do read all of your comments. This has been this training, and I am so looking forward to jumping into the action of what we're going to talk about in the upcoming trainings. And with that being said, I will catch you in the next one.